Hello and welcome. My name is Leah Kopke and I'm a 3D motion design freelancer. This is my podcast, Ambient 3D Animations. I am so excited because I got this beautiful reference from Oak Mill Bakery, and today I'm going to show you how to get your 3D models ready inside of Cinema 4D to import into Substance Painter so that you can texture your models and get them ready for whatever renderer you'll be using, whether if that is Redshift, Unreal Engine, or another one. Let's go ahead and get started. Now, I have to say that one of my favorite things about 3D modeling food is getting to eat the references afterwards. Try 3D modeling your own food. It's a really fun project. So here I have two 3D model cheesecakes as examples because I think that they'll both help you understand how to import different types of models. So this one over here, this is our pumpkin spice cheesecake, and you can see that it has some carrots on the top, some whipped cream. I decide to keep these as separate objects. And then we also have our chocolate cheesecake over here. So we have two cheesecakes that we can show how this works on. And you'll notice that since this one is one model and it's not made up of separate parts that we might want for animation or flexibility or things like that later on, since this is just one model, we don't need to worry about telling Substance Painter that there are separate objects in the scene. Now, in the case for this, if we do want to paint these elements separately, there is a little bit of a process to be aware of. And what we'll need to do is, first of all, you'll want to make sure that your UV edit, so by default, we're in the standard mode. And if you go into your UV edit, you'll see that our objects here, if I click on all of them, I have them all set up in here separately. And if I click on the pumpkin cheesecake, I actually sculpted this inside Cinema 4D. And if that's new to you, I have a whole playlist on all the sculpting brushes and how to sculpt inside of Cinema 4D. So you can check that out in the description. I'll leave a link to that. But you'll notice that our pumpkin cheesecake, at the base level, you'll see that it has different levels in here. And if I actually change this to garage shading lines, you'll see that we have different numbers of polygons. So at level 0, this is just a cube and it has very few polygons. At level 1, it's subdivided. Level 2, it's subdivided. Level 3, and each level starts getting more detail. And the highest level is really the level that has the detail, like what's in the crust and everything like that. So that's to be aware of in here. But inside of your UV editor, you're actually going to be seeing whatever is your base object. So my base object is showing up in here. And something that I'd like to just point out is if we go into polygon mode, you'll also see that base object in here. And the place where I chose to put the seam on this is I chose to put the seam actually right here on the bottom, so that these bottom edges have a seam. So 3 of these edges on the bottom have a seam, and then everything else doesn't have a seam. And that just looks nicer when you're texturing, to try to hide your seams where your texture will be on your object. And another thing to make sure of while you're doing your UVs is just to make sure that nothing is overlapping, unless if it makes sense. Like for the carrots, they're all the same form, and I'm okay with them all being textured the exact same. So those textures do overlap, but I want the whipped cream to not overlap with the cake. So you need to be strategic about making sure that everything in here is as large as it can be, because this is actually a 2D representation of the texture that will be wrapped around your model. So this will be so many pixels by so many pixels, and you'll have texture data on here that is being wrapped around your model. So these are your polygons, and you'll see as I click on one, the one in the viewport highlights. And I put everything in one texture so that it saves memory, instead of making separate textures for the whipped cream, a separate texture for the cake, and such like that. It just saves memory, saves space to have one 4K texture. You can decide what resolution works best for your project, whether if you're doing something that's an advertisement or a video game. Constraints are different depending on what you're doing. But that's the basic setup there. So this is a good start, and once we have that, we can now tell Cinema 4D with color vertex maps what will be textured separately, or what we want to select separately inside of Substance Painter. So for the whipped cream, let's start with that. I'll right click on that, and under other tags, you'll find your vertex color. So I can go ahead and click on that. I'll go back into the standard mode actually for this, and I will go ahead and select the polygons here. Now, if you are new to UV editing, you can check out the video in the description where I go over how to UV edit a hand and get that ready for texturing. But here's the whipped cream. I want to go ahead and I'll double click on the vertex color tag. And in here I can choose a color. And I want to make sure that I have all the polygons selected. For the whipped cream, I have visible only turned off so that I'm selecting everything. And then when I double click on this, I can choose a color. I can choose to make the whipped cream this pink color and hit apply selected. And that'll just notify that since this is a different color to Substance Painter, that we want to texture this separately. And you can do that for various objects. If I want the carrots to all be textured together as a group and be selectable as a group, kind of like a mask, I'll hit vertex color again, right click, other tags, vertex color, and I can go ahead and choose to make this carrot orange. And I'll go ahead and select all the polygons here. And then once I do that, I can apply selected, and I'll apply that color to all the polygons. And then since these carrots are about the same geometry, I can control click to drag and copy this to each one of the carrots. And now each of these carrots should be orange if I click on these color tags. And if I click on the whipped cream, that's pink. So we have those as separate objects, which is great. Now the last part is the pumpkin cheesecake. So we can right click on this as well, go into our other tags, choose vertex color, and let's choose a color inside here. I'll choose red. Make sure that I have all of these selected. Click on the color tag again, vertex color tag, hit apply selected. And now you can see we have these all set up as separate objects. And this is a step you wouldn't need to do if you are just going to paint this all as one, and you don't need to have it be recognized by Substance Painter as having separate parts to texture separately. But for this one, we want to have the vertex color tags added in there. Now I want to go over how to create an ambient occlusion map and a normal map, or you could even make a displacement map if you want, so that your model here inside of Cinema 4D, if you sculpted it, you can have a lower resolution model with that additional detail as a texture if you don't want to have too many polygons. So we had spoken a little bit about how the sculpting layers, if I double click on our sculpting layers here, how we can make these different sculpting levels and see more of the detail that we added with our layers while sculpting. And if I want to, let's say, have fewer polygons, and I'll have the line show up, I could choose, and you can see your polygon count up here, by the way. I could decide, you know what, I can have something a little bit higher poly, so maybe I want this at 6, but I definitely don't want this many polygons as at 7. So I'll export a model out with this polygon count, and then I'll make everything else, the detail in level 7, just a normal map or a displacement map. So you can choose the level. If you're doing something that requires a lower resolution, you can take this down further. So you have flexibility. You could even take this down to level 0 and add in that additional data as a normal map. So let's go back to 7 for right now and hit Shift C because we're going to open up our Bake Sculpt. I'm going to double click on this here. But if you don't see it already, just type Bake Sculpt. I had opened it up recently, so it was already showing up for me. But if you aren't, just type it in and then double click on this. And once you do that, you'll have some options in here. You can choose your location of where you would like to save your project. You can choose your format, so I can choose TIFF if I'd like. I can choose the color depth that I'd like to use. You can use 16-bit or 32-bit, it's up to you. Maybe for right now I'll use 16-bit. You can choose your resolution. This is really dependent on your project and how much memory is okay to use. I'm going to go ahead with 4K textures. You can choose your pixel border, that's the area around your polygon islands in the UV map. And then once you have those settings set up, we can switch over to options. Now here is where you choose, do you want a displacement map? Do you want a normal map? I do want a normal map, so I'll keep that turned on. I do want ambient occlusion, so I'll keep that on. Optimal mapping I'll keep off because I did the UV mapping manually. This will automate it, but it usually isn't as accurate as if you do it yourself, and you may run into errors if you use cubic or angle for the calculations of your UV map. So I suggest doing it yourself. And then you can choose to include the top levels. I will use that. For the target object low resolution mesh, this is where you choose your base mesh. So I chose to have mine at level 5. You could choose 1, 2, whatever you want in here. I'm going to choose 5 so that I have a higher resolution mesh. And then everything from 5 and up will be added as a texture, as texture detail instead of detail in the actual geometry. And then you can choose level 7, which is the highest level, and everything up to 7 will be used as a texture. If you choose something lower, which you can, then you'll just have less detail in the texture. But for my situation, I want 5 and 7. You can choose what works best for your project. And I just want the normal map and the ambient occlusion. You can hit preview to preview what this will look like. Low res, you can see our normal map starting to show up in here with some interesting textures. And once you're happy with everything, you can hit bake. But before we do that, we want to check our settings tab, because something that I found works well is to have this on tangent for the method. So I'll keep that on tangent, and I'll have the UVs continue. If you want to learn these settings in greater depth, I have another video that goes through how to bake sculpt your objects and goes into this even in greater depth, comparing every single setting in here. So I'll leave a link to that below. I'm going to go ahead and hit bake. And I'm going to overwrite the ones that I already saved of this. So I'm going to hit yes. And now you can see that everything baked out inside of my folder. So here we are. You can see that everything's in here, good to go. We have both of our textures. So now what we need to do is export out an FBX of this. So let's go ahead and go through that process. So when we export this out as an FBX, you'll notice that when we did the bake sculpt, it actually made a copy of our model at that resolution. So if I move this out, you can see that that's the lower resolution model. So I like to hit File, Save on the old project, and then Save As, and create a new file, just so that you can keep your old sculpting data. So this one, I'm going to name no sculpting data. No sculpting. So we'll make a copy. So now that that is ready to go, I'm just going to change back into garage shading mode so that we can see a little bit more easily. I'm going to delete this pumpkin cheesecake over here with the sculpting layers because we no longer need it, because we have this new low resolution version that we can use. Inside of Cinema 4D, if we go into our material manager, you'll see that when we baked out this pumpkin cheesecake, it did create a material. Now, this is just a standard material with the native Cinema 4D, and we don't really need this, so I'm actually going to delete this. But the important thing to be aware of and to know is that when you create a material and apply it to these, that creates something called a texture set inside of Substance 3D Painter. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this here. A texture set is basically a group of textures making up the textures for a 3D model, from normal maps to color maps, metalness maps, roughness maps, and all of that. That's your texture set. And in this case, we are using one texture set for everything. And the way we want to let Substance 3D know is to apply the same texture to everything. It doesn't need to be anything fancy or anything like that. So I could just add a standard material and apply this plain material to everything. Plain gray material. And that's just to let it know that this is all one texture set. This won't be what the final looks like. And now that we've done that, we need to go into File, Export, and we want to export this out as an FBX, but instead of pressing this button here, I'm going to hit the little gear icon next to it so that I can walk through the settings with you so you can export yours out similar to mine. And inside of here, you'll see some different options. You can include cameras, blinds, lights, instances. I don't really need that in this case. You can decide what works for your project. I want to include normals in here. And I'd like to include vertex colors, because remember, the vertex colors are going to be what is used in order to differentiate different masks for different parts of our model. Now, in the case where we didn't need the vertex color data and we didn't have more than one part of this model we'd like to texture separately, that's not necessary, but we do need that here in order to keep that information. So this all looks good. I'm going to hit OK. You can choose a location to save this. I'll save it here. And I'm going to just keep the name Cheesecake, no sculpting data, and hit save. So now we have our FBX ready to open up. There is a detail that I'd like to point out to you really quickly, is that Cinema 4D and Redshift both work with a normal map called OpenGL. There's two different kinds of normal maps. There's DirectX and OpenGL. Cinema 4D and Redshift work with OpenGL. Unreal Engine and some other rendering software works with DirectX. I'm going to show you how to change OpenGL to DirectX in case if you would like to work within that and use it for something like Unreal Engine. One way we can do this is with Photoshop. So here I am inside of Photoshop, and this is my project. Now, if you aren't already seeing your layers, you can open it up in here under your window drop-down menu, and then you should see layers. You can also open up your channels. You'll see that's a tab in here. So this is our normal map texture in our layers. We're going to want to click on the channel because the only difference between the DirectX and the OpenGL normal maps is actually the green channels inverted. So they use these RGB values in order to determine what direction the surface is moving, if it's pushing out or pushing in, and that kind of thing. So the way we flip the green is using the hotkey. After this is selected, we use the hotkey Control and I, and then it flips it. So now it's flipped, and this is something we can work with here. And I'm just going to save this as a copy. All I'm going to do is add at the end of the name DirectX. So I'll go ahead and save this here, and then that way we have an OpenGL and a DirectX. In another video, I'll talk about how to texture your models after we paint them, and I'll go over how to do that in both Unreal Engine and Redshift, because I think those are pretty common ones right there. So I'll go ahead and save that. And now that we have that out of the way, here we are in Adobe Substance Painter. Now let's go into File, New, and we'll need to select what kind of template we'd like to use. Now, the nice thing about the PBR is that it can be used in a lot of different rendering software. It's pretty standardized, this PBR metallic roughness, so I'm probably going to choose that. But you'll see that they have Unreal Engine templates, they have V-Ray material templates and all of that. So there's a lot of different options in here, Blender, Keyshot, all that stuff. I'm going to click on the PBR, and I'm going to select my file, my FBX here, open it. I'm going to change my document resolution to be 4K so that it looks real nice. And then this is where you get to choose your normal map format. So you have that option, DirectX or OpenGL. It depends on your project and what you're using. I'm going to work with the DirectX, knowing that I can import this in something else because I also have an OpenGL, but that's not going to affect the other maps really. So we're just giving ourselves options by having both. And everything else looks pretty much good. So I'll go ahead and hit OK. And we'll open this up. So here we are. You can see that we have our model in here, and that is Absolutely lovely. The thing that we are missing, you may notice, is our normal map. So I'm going to show you where to find that quickly. I'm going to delete this layer that was automatically added in here. And I'm going to add in a new fill layer. So I'll click on that, and under our fill layer we have color selected, so we can adjust the color. It's just this gray for right now. We can also add in our normal, so I'll click on the normal, and then it's as simple as dragging and dropping your DirectX normal map into here. It'll load, and you can kind of look at the texture and recognize, does this look like it's supposed to? And if it does, we're good to go. So now with the normal map in place, the other thing that I'd like to show you is that if you do want a fill layer to represent the color here, I have color selected, you can add in an ambient occlusion. And that'll show some more of the crevices and the shadows and a texture. And you can again adjust the opacity in here. Maybe you want to set this to be an overlay or multiply, and you can have that go over another texture as you're painting, just to add in some extra detail and shadows if you'd like to have that in there. I'm going to actually name both of these, so I'll double click and name this AO, and then this first fill layer with just our normal map in there, I'm going to name this normal and base. We can add in more details later on. I'm not going to go through the whole painting process in this video, although I am interested in showing that in the future, so if you're interested in that, follow along. Now, the other important thing that I want to show you just real quick is that under this texture set list, you'll see that we have the material we had created. Now, I didn't name this, but if you did name your material, it would have the name here and the size and all of that. And that's basically it. I can rename it. I will rename this. This is just going to be pumpkin cheesecake. And that's basically what we're adding all these layers to, is this. Now, if you had more than one model in here with more than one texture set, instead of using one texture set for everything like I'm doing, you would see more than one in here that you could texture separately. Now, I think that this is working out great. So quickly, I just want to show you how to mask off areas with those vertex color maps that we had talked about. So the first thing you need to do is navigate over here, and these are our texture set settings. We can scroll on down here, and you'll see this thing called mesh maps and bake mesh maps. So this is what we're going to need to do. So I'll hit this button over here. And I feel like at this time we don't need the normal map because we already had that set up in Cinema 4D, and we can also add more onto that while painting later, and we can talk about that in the future. I'm going to turn off the world space normal. I don't need that. This is really what we're focusing on here, is the ID. We already have ambient occlusion baked out from Cinema 4D, so that's not needed. You can keep curvature, position, and thickness in here if you'd like. Now, important thing to keep in mind with this ID is that you need to change your color source here from material color to vertex color, because that's how we had set this up. If you remember earlier in the video when we were in Cinema 4D, we set up some color vertex maps, and that's really what we're referencing here. For position, I do want to use full scene. I'll just call that out really quickly so that if you want to add a texture based on its position, that you're not basing that on the material. In the full scene, it just works better. So that's the main thing I want to point out. And now we can hit Bake Selected Textures. And you'll see that it's running through them. You can kind of see a quick preview. And now that we've done that, we can say return to painting mode. And the cool thing about this is, like, let's say I want to create a new fill layer. So I'm just going to drop this guy in here as an example. So we got this fill layer here, and let's say I want to mask this. So I can right click on this and choose Add Mask with Color Selection. And then here you'll see our ID map shows up here, which is really nice. And we can pick a color and you'll see our color vertex maps. And then we can decide, you know what, right now I just want to paint the carrots or something like that. So I'll select the carrots at the top. And I can rename this carrots actually. So let's do that. We have our color selection going. So let's just adjust our color in here. So you'll see we have this base color. And if I want to adjust the base color to be an orange, that looks like a nice orange for some carrots, then we can go ahead and do that. And of course you can go in here and paint these individual objects and get it a whole lot more detailed. But this is just a quick how to import everything you need to know to import from Cinema 4D into Substance 3D Painter. If you enjoyed this episode and found it helpful, please hit like, subscribe, and join our Discord server where you get to meet other artists and share your artwork. We'd love to see you there. And see you next time here on Ambient 3D Animations.